Not gonna lie, this passage is, it has become one of my big pet peeves when it comes to nudism and the Bible, but we're about to get into that. Before we do though, I have a link in the description to my Patreon account if you would like to support me financially. That's the way to do it. We have a $5 Patreon tier and a $10 tier, super affordable. Go ahead and check that out if you would. Now, David and Bath-Sheba. Now, whenever we're talking about nudism and the Bible, often David and Bath-Sheba come up. Not every time, but often enough for it to merit mention on the channel. And so here's the basic story for those of you who are unfamiliar. So in the Bible, you know King David, you know the David and Goliath guy who used a slingshot and killed a giant, that guy. So he becomes king. And he's, generally speaking, a good king, but he makes some mistakes. Some of them are really big mistakes. This is one of my favorite things about the Bible in terms of its heroes, is it shows you the great things that these men did, but it also shows you that, how can I say it politely? They weren't perfect. And so David, the usual honorable thing for a king to do in those days would be to go out and actually fight in the battle with his men. But where do we find David? He's at home while his army is at war, despite the fact that he is a young, able-bodied king, as we're about to see in a different way. So David is on the roof of his palace. He's kind of just chilling and being bored and twiddling his thumbs and kind of just living up the rich life. And he looks down and he sees a woman down below in the royal complex. The woman's bathing. It turns out she's the wife of one of his lieutenants, but she is gorgeous and he's enamored with her. So he sends some of his servants to go see who she is. And he finds out who she is. She's the wife of one of his lieutenants, and he summons her to himself. Says, hey, I am king. You are my subject. You, me, that room, right now. Not a lot she could do about that, so she did it. And then turns out she ended up getting pregnant. Yeah, so David sends a letter out to his troops and orders her husband, Uriah, he's often called, I think the name would be more like Uriah. And so Uriah ends up coming back, and David welcomes him and sees how the war is going. You know, hey, how's it going? Yeah, just so the army's doing good. You got a lot of victories and everything. That's great. Okay, that's enough business for tonight. Why don't you go home and see your wife? Because you've been away for a long time, a great distance. So why don't you go home and see your wife? And Uriah says, "My lord king, I couldn't possibly do that. That wouldn't be fair to my men. I'm a man in command. I have soldiers under me. How could I possibly do that to them? They're out there without their wives, without their children, without their possessions, and they're sleeping on the ground. How can I possibly go home and sleep in my bed and embrace my wife?" And so that's day one. Day two, David tries again, and again, Uriah refuses to go home. Day three, David is kind of losing his patience a little bit, and he gets Uriah as drunk as he possibly can get him. And Uriah decides to go to the bottom floor of the palace and sleep with the slaves. In the palace. So David obviously is getting nowhere, so he sends Uriah back to the front with a letter. And the letter is for the general. And the letter says, put Uriah on the front lines and call a retreat for everyone, and don't tell Uriah. Make sure he dies. Because David's reputation as an honorable king in Israel is in jeopardy because of David's stupid, power-hungry behavior. Not power-hungry, power-drunk behavior. Drunk with power. And his reputation is at stake, so now Uriah has to die. So the general obeys, and Uriah dies. And Bath-Sheba mourns her husband. And then in the very next chapter, the next section, it would have been in the original scroll, but I digress. In the next little bit, Yahweh actually goes to one of his prophets, Nathan, whatever his name was. It's spelled Nathan in English, so we'll just call him Nathan, since I don't remember the Hebrew pronunciation. So he tells Nathan, just said I was going to call him Nathan. He tells Nathan to go to David and tell him this message. There once was a rich man with a huge herd of sheep, a huge flock of sheep. And he had a guest come to his house, and instead of taking one of his own many sheep, he stole the sheep of a poor man. And this sheep was a lamb, and it was the darling of its owner. It slept in his bed and ate off his plate and drank his water and lived in his house, and it was like a pet. It was like a daughter to him. But the rich man took this poor man's little lamb and slaughtered it for the meal for his guest. And David immediately says, "The man who has done this deserves to die." And Nathan goes, That's you. That guy I just talked about, that's you. And David goes, "Oh, you're totally right. What have I done?" And so David is like crushed by his guilt and like finally letting himself, stopping deceiving himself and finally being honest with himself. "Oh my gosh, you're right. That was horrible. I shouldn't have done that." And so I've actually heard it preached from the pulpit that Bathsheba was a shameless seductress who led the greatest king of Israel into sin. This infuriates me to no end because it is virtually the opposite of what the text says. Let's take a look. So a few things to note about Bathsheba. So it says she's bathing, great. But it also says she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. So the whole point of her bathing was because she just had her period. A woman in Israel at the time, if she was on her period, could not participate in worship. She was not allowed anywhere near the tabernacle. She wasn't allowed to be part of religious proceedings. And here she is purifying herself from her uncleanness, which is probably her effort to rejoin religious society in Israel. And then David calls her, she obeys her king. And then David does all of his stuff. And then when Uriah dies, when Uriah dies, she mourns her husband. This is a good woman. This is a good woman. And look, she was purifying herself from her uncleanness, which is exactly what she's supposed to do after she has her period. This is a sacred ceremony. This is something that she's supposed to do as a religious woman in Israel. What does David do? He desecrates this ceremony with his lust, with his drunkenness of power. Alright, so then we have Uriah. Uriah comes home to the king, obeys every single command David gives him throughout the entire thing, 3 times, even when he's blind drunk, refuses to dishonor his men because he's got such a good heart. And then David sends him back to the front with a letter, which Uriah does not open because he's a man of honor, despite the fact that that letter held his own the orders for his own execution, I guess. So at every turn, at every possible opportunity in the story itself, we see that Uriah and Bathsheba are virtuous people in Israel, which makes David's crime all the worse. Then we have the story, the false report that Yahweh gives David about the rich man and the poor man. The rich man with the huge flock of sheep and the poor man with only one sheep. The one sheep is called a lamb. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, there is literally no other image in the Hebrew mindset at the time that is more innocent than a lamb. So how is it that Yahweh, who knows the situation perfectly, if she really was doing something wrong, do you really think he would have presented her as a lamb? I doubt it. She is presented in his false report as a complete passive victim of his scheme. The poor man and the lamb together are both seen as complete victims. So ultimately, I really don't think that an anti-nakedness moral message is anything close to what this passage is getting at. I think what the passage is getting at is that bad people do bad things to good people sometimes. Even religiously virtuous people like Bath-Sheba. And that even great men have their dark moments. If there was only a few people, maybe like a top 5 list of Israeli heroes in the Old Testament, I think David easily makes it into the top 5. But that's just me talking. It's not like I'm an ethnic or religious Jew or anything. Not like I'm an expert on the Hebrew Bible or something, but that's my sense of it from the rest of Scripture, is that David is probably in the top 5, but you can argue about that in the comments if you like. That's just my sense. But on top of that, there just simply is not a rule presented here. You know, Bath-Sheba behaves a certain way, and David behaves a certain way, and Uriah behaves a certain way, and Joab or Yoav or whatever his name is behaves a certain way, but at no point does the author step away and give us a moral mandate of any kind, really, that's supposed to apply to everyone. So I don't see how this passage is relevant to modesty in the first place. If I were to say more, I would probably just be rambling, so I think you know what time it is. This episode of Mudwalkers is brought to you by Naturehem, Todd, Jacob, Jay Sweets, these are my Patreon supporters, I didn't say that part, Jay Sweets, Edward, John S., Joseph, Charlie, Lionheart, Jesse, Adam, Edward T. Sounds like a loud truck or something. Edward T, Nate, Jay Good, Cyan, John W, Clifton, Trev, Scott, None Here, Alan, Marty, Hank, Joseph G, and Flavio. Squirrels are going nuts right now. So, thank you to all my Patreon supporters. You guys are making this channel possible. You're making my work sustainable. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Yeah, you guys are my heroes. This is great. Being able to do the things that I'm doing now and being able to plan ahead for the future to do even cooler things with Mudwalkers because of the support that you guys are providing, it's just going to be awesome. If we keep moving in the direction we're going right now, Mudwalkers is going to keep getting better. So, with that, I'm going to end the video here. I hope that this has been educational, informative. Like I said, I'm really not an expert on these issues. I hope that I am a jumping off point, a springboard to let you, the viewer, take this information and really start thinking about it and go do some more reading, go do some more digging, watch some more videos, and make your own decisions about what all this is pointing to, and go find the facts. Don't take my word for it about what 2 Samuel says about David and Bath-Sheba. Well, you go and read the passage. You go and read the commentaries and the experts and things like that. I shouldn't be the stopping point. There are smarter people out there who know more about this than I do. So use me as a stepping stone. Go ahead and smush my face on the way up, and you go find the the bigger, smarter people than me. With that, I'll end the video here. Have a great day. Be blessed, and get outside. The heat actually seems to have lessened to a great extent. So go get outside, enjoy this, and in general, yeah, it's just healthy to be outside. Let your skin breathe, man. Just go live your best life.